Hi everybody, this is Michael Elderkin coming to you from Score Connect. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about themes and orchestration and the role of narrative. I'm going to be talking to you about some of my ideas behind what should go into a theme and how it should function in relation to the narrative. And I'm going to provide some examples of my process to see how we get that going. Now, today's video is going to be a little bit more conceptual as opposed to practical, just because the nature of what we do when it comes to writing is that, every project is different and every person is different. So not every process is going to apply. So talking about the theory behind it will hopefully give you some insight into my own ideas and may help you figure out yours. Now, when it comes to talking about themes, what are we talking about? I think generally speaking, when I think of a theme, I think of a musical idea that starts at one place and ends. It feels complete and it represents something. But technically, any sort of recognizable repeated rhythmic figure, as well as melodic figure, can be recognized as a theme. Now, a leitmotif, which is a term that we've all heard, and especially in film music, you hear it a lot, is a subcategory of a theme that represents a specific person, situation, or emotion, and often occurs at an important point in the story to either reinforce what's going on screen or to provide insight into the character's psyche or emotional state. Now, we all know that Wagner popularized it, but there have been many composers since then that I'd say have done even more for leitmotifs, including John Williams. Most of John Williams' themes I would consider leitmotifs. Now, motifs themselves are slightly different, and I think it's an important thing to distinguish. A motif, for me, is a small little musical idea. It doesn't even necessarily mean it's complete. There's been a trend in modern film scoring. Now, this is not across the board, but generally speaking, we've moved away from traditional thematic material to more motivic material because it fits better in the style of minimalism that seems to be so widely accepted. Like, take, for example, the Hans Zimmer Batman theme. Those two notes, the minor third interval, while it does represent Batman, it's not a complete musical idea to me. And because it's such a small fraction, I would classify that as a motif compared to a theme. I think it's pretty interesting because at least my thoughts regarding why we're much more on the motivic side of things as opposed to just the pure thematic side. Yes, musical tastes have changed. We tend to favor a lot more minimalism and driving rhythms, repetitiveness. But I feel like it's also because the role of music in the context of film and media has changed. I feel like music today is more often treated as an element of the aesthetic. Now, what I mean by that is it's treated more like lighting would be or set design would be, whereas before I'm talking about generally 2005 and before. That's a rough time where we started having this change. Music was thought more of as an additional character. Obviously, it's not a character that you saw, but it's a character that embodied the spirit of the film and was given more of a platform to shine, whereas today things have to generally be much more understated. And I think there's a very fine line to toe. There are some people that say that themes have no place in today's film or TV world, and I just don't believe that, because I believe, psychologically and evolutionarily speaking, humans love melody. They love little earworms that they can get locked onto, and I think they're very powerful devices. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, the theme I'm just about to delve into is one of my own. Now, recently I recorded and released a musical called Mascherato. Now, this might be considered cheating a little bit because it's not from a film, but because the nature of the recording is that there's no visual component, the theme and the orchestration have more weight put on it. So I hope that my insight into my process behind it and what I was thinking about in terms of the context with the narrative will be helpful to you. Now, before I started writing Mascherato, I knew for sure that I wanted to have a lot of themes. For me, a tastefully used theme at just the right moment can trigger the right emotional impact. And I wanted to have all my themes be able to be sort of transfigured and reused and flipped around here and there with different harmonizations, different rhythms. Now, for our setting for this story, it's set in 18th century Venice around the time of the Carnival. Now, I did a lot of research into this time period because I didn't know a lot, but what I found was that it was a very colorful time. The masks themselves symbolize sort of a deconstructing of any class system, so the upper class and lower class were able to intermingle with one another. There were lots of exhibitions, performances, and it was just a general atmosphere of wonder and whimsy. And I really wanted to be able to reflect that in the music itself. Now, the theme that I'm just about to analyze is called the Venice theme, and that's the theme that opens the show, and it's the one that the Venetian citizens all sing. And so I had to think from the perspective of the citizens, what would be an easy way to write something really catchy that even the most unmusical Venetians would be able to sing. And I began thinking about musical devices and what's a musical device that everybody can recognize. And I thought, okay, a scale. Everybody knows what a scale sounds like. Simple enough. Now, I took a fraction of that and ended up with this. Sounds like a vocal warm-up. Now, I just sort of played around with this for a little bit. I went up and down these notes. I liked the opening. It made sense to me. And then I thought, we can flip it on its head a little bit and alternate notes back and forth. I like that. And then go back down. Now, it was not as simple to get that at first. Even though it's a relatively simple musical idea, it was doing a lot of noodling around with different notes and figuring out what seems natural and what would be catchy and what would fit nicely. Now, harmonically speaking, it's difficult to make something sound Italian. There's obviously lots and lots of Italian music, and of course Vivaldi lived in Venice all his life. But at the same time, when writing this, I had to think about the casual listener and what harmonic devices would put them in the middle of Venice. Orchestrationally, I couldn't even include accordions just because they weren't around at that time. So I had to get a little creative. And so this first phrase, I thought I'd start off harmonically less adventurous. So we're just going to start with a C major chord going to an F major chord. And then the second phrase, because any good melody will change up during the second phrase, I decided to do something a little bit different and actually leap up. But still stay within the confines of C major, but instead, underneath, we're harmonizing with a C major going to an A minor and then an E minor. And then finally, the third phrase, we go back to the original opening. But this time, I decided to add a little bit of spice, and instead of going C major to F major, go C major to F minor. Now, our fourth fragment of the first opening phrase is where it gets most harmonically adventurous. I sort of wanted to start as basic as we could, and then as we made our way through the phrase, it opened up, harmonically speaking, and became a little bit more complex. So what we've heard so far is... And then our fourth and final phrase is... So right there, we use some borrowed chords from other keys. Now the melody itself stays pretty diatonic except for the A flat. But underneath we have A flat major, E major, then back to G major, and then back to our home key. Now, this melody might seem oversimplified, and it was meant to sound that way, but I can assure you that I had a long page full of different permutations of these notes, trying to find the exact one that worked as well as I wanted it to. The idea behind having this simple melody was a couple of reasons. Number one, I wanted it to be catchy, and generally speaking, I found that stepwise motion contributed to earworms. They're easier to remember. And two, I wanted it to fit within the context of the narrative, being something that the Venetian citizens would sing. I wanted it to feel almost like a children's song melody, something that everybody would know and would be able to sing along to. And the idea of keeping it so diatonic, keeping it within the key of C major, or whatever key I decided to transpose it to, meant that I could reharmonize it fairly easily without being sort of locked into any harmonic language that was determined by the notes I chose. Now that opening phrase I just played through for you repeats twice technically in this opening phrase. So it's an 8-bar phrase overall, and actually the end of this 8-bar phrase has us modulating to E major. So I'm going to play the full orchestrated track for you now, just so you can hear it in context.
Good Signora, tell me, where is San Marco?
My dear lady, look, you have just arrived. Shops and stores to see, have a spree. Just remember, customers do help us survive.
Fancy lace and clothing, what do you fancy?
Something else you need only ask.
We will do our best to accommodate. That's the way we do it here in the city of the moss.
Now, as you just heard, those two phrases were basically the same, except in the second phrase, when we reach the part where we hit the A flat major, we go to our E major, but then I tonicize this E major chord by going down to B major, and then back up to E major. And the idea behind that is that immediately after, we go back to C major, and registerally speaking, we're back to where we began, but it feels like we've traveled really far and adds a lot of interest to the music. So now that we've talked about the melody, it's time to talk about the orchestration of this opening phrase. As I mentioned before, Vivaldi was the composer that lived in Venice his whole life, so that's actually where I started having ideas germinate. You know, listening to a lot of his music, he had a lot of harpsichord and a lot of basso continuo and sort of just lightly chugging strings underneath. So that is sort of the style I was going for. You can't have anything like an accordion in an 18th century Venetian musical because the accordion just didn't exist. So what I tried to do was merge the colorful harmonies, the simple melodic construction, and a nice sort of period orchestration, at least as far as the general public is concerned, to merge it all together in this cohesive but unique sounding opening. So why did I take the time to go into such detail about a relatively small fragment? Well, I feel like it's important to highlight the thought that goes into even the simplest of themes, as I think that writing themes that truly embody the story is difficult. In my music, I always try to strive for something that uniquely interlocks the music with the story in the setting, so it can function as a unique voice, not necessarily something that could be transplanted into another film. Now, take the Venice theme that you heard. Due to the simplistic nature of the melody, the setting authenticity is ingrained, as the melody is catered towards the Venetian citizens and the simplistic folk songs that they most likely sung. Now, the colorful harmony is introduced bit by bit as we're taken further into the carnival, and the orchestration firmly plants us in the 18th century. And now time for a shameless plug. As I said at the beginning, I recently released Mascherato on streaming services, so Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, it's on all of them. I'd encourage you to go listen, and listen out for the Venice theme, and see how it changes throughout the musical. It might give you some good ideas on how to treat your own thematic material. But thank you for watching.